Welcome to Bond and Chat, my 147th live stream altogether, but the seventh one, double seventh one, on the rebranded second channel of mine, now called PMDB Live, where all future live videos of mine on YouTube will be here. For those who enjoy the PMDB experience live, nothing quite like it. But unlike most of my previous live streams, um, it's going to be a general chat, but it's also going to be a live video talking about the original official 20 James Bond films, including the two unofficial films, Casino Royale and Never Say Never Again. I finally did it, folks. I've rewatched my original VHS Bond collection from Dr. No to Die Another Day. And in this video, along with general chit chat with whomever comes in, I'll be looking back and discussing all the 20 official Bond films I've rewatched this year. It took a while. But um, I finally got through. Well, I know there's the Daniel Craig era to go through next, but I thought I would, go live and discuss the first 40 years of Bond on film. I was going to go in order of how I've ranked these movies, but I'm going to go in order they were released. So let's start with the the first official James Bond film, which was Dr. No from 1962, directed by Terence Young, starring Sean Connery, who many consider the definitive James Bond. It's really hard to argue. Now, my personal favorite, I'll mention in a wee bit once we get to his films, but Connery's like my constant number two. He was at one point in my life. He was number one, but it's really hard to argue that he isn't the definitive James Bond. So I started rewatching the James Bond films again at the start of the year. I started rewatching them all, but then I started rewatching and reviewing all the WrestleManias in March, April. So my little Bond marathon got put on the shelf for a little while. But at the start of the year, I got through about 11 of them, starting with Dr. No from 1962, 56 years ago now. I thought it was a great start to the franchise. It's not my favorite James Bond film, and I don't think it's the best one either, but I give it a 7 out of 10, double 7 out of 10. So it was a solid start to the Bond franchise, Bond series. Now, I wouldn't say I'm the biggest James Bond fan ever. Far from. I'm not really obsessed with anything in life. I don't want to really need to know everything about a certain film franchise or a sport, whatever. But I would say I know much more than the casual James Bond viewer, if you will. But Doctor No, mostly set in Jamaica, is great escapism, and features one of the most gorgeous Bond women, Ursula Andress, in her famous scene of coming out of the ocean when she meets Sean Connery as James Bond. So it's a solid start to the series. Just a year later was From Russia with Love, which I gave a 9 out of 10. Since rewatching all the Bond films, I would say it's the best one. Usually The Spy Who Loved Me, which I'll get on to later, is my favorite James Bond film, but after rewatching them this year, I would say From Russia with Love is the definitive, near-perfect James Bond film. Once again stars Sean Connery, and once again directed by Terence Young. I believe this is Sean Connery at his best. This is his definitive James Bond film. It follows on from the events of Doctor No, where Spectre, got a chance to get revenge on James Bond after he killed Doctor No. Spoiler alert, if you've not seen Doctor No. Um, so, there's a chance for them to get revenge on him in this film. It features one of the best scenes, one of the best build-ups to the scene too. The brawl between Robert Shaw and Sean Connery on an Orient Express in this film is one of the best fight scenes I've seen in cinema, in movies in general, not just the James Bond series. And I just think it's a great spy adventure with memorable characters, great baddies, and Sean Connery at his best. So this is the near perfect James Bond film. And if I were to show someone who has never seen a James Bond film before one Bond film, this would be it. From Russia with Love. Um, First day, hold on. Next up in 1964 was Goldfinger, directed by Guy Hamilton. It's the third to star Sean Connery and the third Bond film of the official James Bond series. Now, I'm sure there'll be those out there whom will correct me and say, well, there was Casino Royale, the TV film that was released in the 50s. But not only have I not watched that one, I know, shame on me. What kind of Bond fan am I? But it's I'm just concentrating on the movies, the ones that were released in cinema from, and Doctor No was the first, and so on and so forth. So if any Bond fans out there get offended by me not commenting on Casino Royale from 1954, I think it was made. It went live on TV in America, I believe. Forgive me. I'm just concentrating on the 20 official James Bond films and the two other unofficial films. But Goldfinger, I used to enjoy a lot more. And when I first got into James Bond, I was, they came on ITV, huge marathon back in the day. And when I seen the advert, seen Jaws in the advert, that caught my attention, the bad guy Jaws. And it was when I started watching them one by one, it was Goldfinger that really, got me hooked into James Bond. And it has some of the most memorable scenes in the James Bond franchise, Goldfinger. But overall, I don't. It's not the best. It's above average. I give it a 7 out of 10. I'd put it higher than Doctor No, but it's a fall from Russia with Love. When you rewatch them, but it does contain two very memorable villains in Goldfinger. All right, Goldfinger and Oddjob, and Sean Connery's brilliant in it again. Um, and it does have some memorable scenes and moments in this one, including the debut of the Aston Martin DB5, the most iconic James Bond car of all time. But overall, I rate films in the franchise like From Russia with Love better, and I think Sean Connery was better. I mean, he's solid in Goldfinger too, but I think he is at his very very best in From Russia with Love, and I think From Russia with Love, not is the near perfect Bond film. And another year later, 1965, we're on to Thunderball, the fourth one to star Sean Connery. Now, this was at the peak, the very peak of the golden age of the Bond movies. Bond was everywhere. Sean Connery was everywhere. Thunderball is, with box office adjusted, is the most successful James Bond film of all time. But do I think it's, I rate Doctor No, From Russia of Love, and Goldfinger all above Thunderball. I think a little bit the magic's gone by the time you get to Thunderball. It's a bit too long. There's a bit too many boring scenes in it. There's a lot of good scenes in it. And Sean Connery's superb once again in this one. but there's some elements to the film where you get the feeling that some things are getting a bit too tiresome, already starting to get a bit tiresome with this one. In fact, I don't know how many people know this, but Sean Connery came close to being killed. Basically, there's a scene involving sharks, and some sort of mistake happened where it's in the film, I believe, where Bond actually comes face to face with a shark, and it wasn't supposed to happen the way it was, and um, it's once again directed by Terence Young, who directed the first two James Bond films, and he says in that particular scene that Sean Connery wasn't acting, and so yeah, he was a close call in that particular film, but I gave Thunderball a 6 out of 10. So it's a decent entry to the Bond franchise, but it's by far not the best one, and one of the lesser Connery ones. 2 years later, 1967, was the release of two James Bond films, one official, one unofficial. We'll talk about the unofficial one first, since that was released, I believe, in May 1967, and the official one was released in about December 1967, I think. Um, Casino Royale, the spoof. Until this year, I had never ever seen it. I'd seen bits here and there, but I'd never sat down and watched the entire film before. Casino Royale. There it is. Um, it's a hard watch. It's a spoof of the James Bond films. It's not a serious one, but then again, some of the entries verge on being a spoof of themselves later on in the franchise. But this is a straight-on spoof, starring Peter Sellers, Ursula Andress is back, David Niven. I think originally the plan was to make a serious Casino Royale film, which would have been interesting to see what they would have done in 1967, but they chose to go the spoof route, and it's a very colourful film, but it is officially and unofficially in my opinion, the worst James Bond film ever made. I could only give it 2 out of 10. It's very hard to watch. I don't think a lot of the jokes are funny, and it's the first time I've ever seen it this year, and I'm not in a rush to watch it again. I'll tell you that right now. Also, there, released that year, was You Only Live Twice, the fifth to star Sean Connery, and also features my favorite actor of all time, bar none, Donald Pleasance, the great Dr. Loomis from the Halloween movies. He stars in this James Bond film as Blofeld, um, the bald baddie with the cat, the white cat. And now, I think by this stage, you can tell that Sean Connery he's fed. He's done with playing James Bond, and you can tell in this movie. It's another, you know, decent entry to the Bond series, but it's far from my favorites. I enjoyed Thunderball more than You Only Live Twice, which is directed by Lewis Gilbert. Um, I think You Only Live Twice is one of the much more adventurous and daring than Thunderball. But I don't know. I find myself not really rewatching it as much as the others. So I still give it a solid 6 out of 10. But to me, out of the 60s Sean Connery James Bond films, it's the weakest one. 2 years after, we are into the one and only entry starring George Lazenby in one of the best James Bond films ever, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I rate it above Goldfinger. To me, it's the second best Bond film in the 60s. However, I as I say, it's hard to argue um, with people who claim Sean Connery is the best James Bond ever, and he's always, once upon a time he was my number one. He's always like my second favorite. Um, Roger Moore is can't see past him, and Timothy Dalton. I enjoy a lot of stuff he does in the films. Pierce Brosnan, enjoy his stuff. Daniel Craig, same with him. But I'd say the I'd say George Lazenby. Apart from the fighting scenes, he's terrific in the fighting scenes. In fact, some of the very best fighting scenes are from this film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is directed by Peter Hunt, who was an editor on the previous James Bond films. But George Lazenby, nothing against the guy, in real life, but he's not a great James Bond. He's not a great actor. So I think with another actor in place, this film, I give it a double 7 out of 10, but this film would have maybe gotten an 8, perhaps even a 9, had there been a different Bond, and maybe Timothy Dalton would have been very, very good in this particular James Bond film. I Maybe George Lazenby would have got better had he, continued on with his 7 film contract. But to me, he is the biggest Bond actor out of the 6. But On Her Majesty's Secret Service, if you can ignore its flaws, is one of the best entries to the series, and it's currently in 4th place of my overall rankings of the original official 20 films. Now, the 1970s, I remember watching behind the scenes documentaries talking about Diamonds Are Forever, which was released in 1971, saw the return of Sean Connery to the role of James Bond after 4 years away. They got him back. On Her Majesty's Secret Service was not a success at the box office as much as the Connery films were, so here he is back again. I believe he got paid $1 million, which was a huge amount at the time. However, Diamonds Are Forever is one of the weaker Bond films. It's enjoyable for what it is, but I've never, by the end, I don't like the ending anyways at all on the oil rig. I think it's a very weak ending, but it does have some funny moments throughout the film and very Bond-like classic moments. But I would say it's definitely one of the weaker Bond films. It's which is surprising because it was directed by Guy Hamilton, who directed Goldfinger. But I don't think much of Diamonds Are Forever. I don't really rate it that much. Only give it a 5 out of 10. And it's great to see Sean Connery back. As I say, I was disappointed with George Lazenby in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but definitely one of the weaker entries. Now, I'm just going to check messages, folks. This is not just a discussion of the James Bond franchise, but it's also general chat. Whoever comes in, I'll interact with, and just multitasking here, just checking the messages. Because finally got done. Finally got around to watching Die Another Day, so I thought I've got to chat about this and give my thoughts on the Bond franchise after rewatching them this year. I haven't rewatched them in a long time. Now, I've talked about the Bond franchise, all the films before, but I think this will be the most in-depth video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share this video if anybody wants to come in and chat on Facebook, discuss Bond or James Bond, the womanizer, an increasing politically incorrect figure. Maybe that's why I like him more and more these days. Right, we'll share this bad boy on Facebook. And we'll get right into the Roger Moore era of the Bond franchise. Okay. Now, as I've mentioned previously, Roger Moore is my favorite James Bond. And he has been for many years. I've mentioned this before in videos, I was privileged enough to see Roger Moore in person. I've got his signature, I've got one of his books. He came to my city just a couple of years ago, in fact, just like 6 months before he passed away in 2017. Um, just a gentleman and an inspiration of a man. Um, and his first James Bond film was in 1973, 45 years ago. Um, he's very different from Sean Connery. Um, but I believe, you can give Sean Connery credit for starting the James Bond boom period in films, anyways. Obviously, you would give all the credit for James Bond existing to Ian Fleming. If it weren't for Ian Fleming, we wouldn't be here today talking about James Bond. As for the films, Sean Connery, Sean Connery, and Sean Connery, that got Bond on the map in regards to films. Now, Live and Let Die is directed by Guy Hamilton, who directed Diamonds Are Forever and Goldfinger. Um, Moore is a decent entry as far as performance goes for Roger Moore. But Live and Let Die, I'd rate it just above Diamonds Are Forever. I gave it a 6 out of 10, but it's below the likes of On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Dr. No, Goldfinger. It has all the ingredients to be one of the best James Bond films ever. But for some reason, it just doesn't get to that like 4-star, 5-star classic. It just sort of stays put in just an above average James Bond film. Um, Now, just a year later, they kind of rushed to the next Roger Moore outing, which was The Man with the Golden Gun in 1974. I never look forward to rewatching this James Bond film, and I always get surprised when people say it's one of their best. It's their favorite, rather, or one of their favorites. I don't get it. And plus, they tried to make Roger Moore's James Bond more like Sean Connery's James Bond. It does not work at all. Does not work at all. It does have its enjoyable moments. I particularly like the scenes where Roger Moore's fighting a couple of ninjas at a ninja school. It was the whole Bruce Lee craze going on in the 1970s during the time, and Roger Moore is probably the weakest out of all the Bond actors in regards of fight scenes, but here he holds his own. He is definitely his best fighting scenes in this film, and also contains one of the most memorable car stunts in film history. Um, but it's definitely, I only rated it 4 out of 10. It's definitely one of the worst, or one of the, I wouldn't say worst. Worst words probably a bit too harsh for this film, but it's definitely one of the weaker James Bond films out there, and I wouldn't highly recommend anybody watching it. Well, next up, 3 years later, 1977, is which is usually my favorite James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me, which is directed by Lewis Gilbert. Now, Guy Hamilton, he directed The Man with the Golden Gun. That was his fourth and final James Bond film directing, and Lewis Gilbert returns exactly 10 years later after the You Only Live Twice Bond film with Sean Connery to direct this one, which debuts the best Bond henchman, villain in general, Jaws, Richard Kiel as Jaws. Um, if I didn't see him in an advert 20 odd years ago, I perhaps would have never bothered with the James Bond franchise. It was him that drew me into the Bond films, and it was Goldfinger that got me hooked. Um, Roger Moore, I think this is his very best performance in as James Bond and The Spy Who Loved Me, and it has just about everything. All the ingredients are there. Very memorable henchman, as I've mentioned. And this one is usually when anybody asks me what is your favorite Bond film, I always often say it's The Spy Who Loved Me. But after rewatching them, I find From Russia of Love um, the best out of the bunch, but still gave it a solid 8 out of 10, and um, I think it'll always be high up in my rankings. And features my favorite James Bond, Roger Moore, and in this particular Bond outing, he is at his very, very best. As I say, when I tried to turn his Bond more like Sean Connery's Bond in The Man with the Golden Gun, it didn't work. After a fairly decent outing in Live and Let Die, they went a bit backwards with Moore's performance, which wasn't Moore's fault, but the direction he was getting, they went a bit backwards um, with Moore in The Man with the Golden Gun. But The Spy Who Loved Me, um, Moore's at his best, and the franchise is back on track. Um, like I say, Bond movies got put in the map by Sean Connery, but it was Roger Moore, I believe, you can thank for the Bond franchise continuing after Sean Connery. Now we get on to 1979's Moonraker, which I don't know if you can see, but it's the worst it's the worst official. It's not as bad as the spoof Casino Royale, but it's close. I could only give it a 3 out of 10. I was very hard to sit through. Very hard rewatching that as a 30-year-old man. Um, I seem to enjoy this film much more as a kid. It was good to see at the time Jaws returning. Um, Roger Moore's he's great in this film, but the film overall and all this space nonsense at the end is you just want to turn it off once all these laser battles are happening in space towards the end of the film. Very hard to sit through, but it does contain some decent stunts, and there's I think I mean it's the worst James Bond film officially, but it does contain my favorite scene in the entire Bond franchise. It's the pigeon doing a double take when it sees Bond in the film, um, emerging from a river in a gondola, and I just love that little scene in the film. Always makes me giggle. But anyway, I mean, apart from that scene, more solid, and it's good. It's kind of good to see Jaws back, but then they kind of ruin his character a wee bit. He gets a bit too silly. I'm not sure it's the best. I'm going to talk wrestling terms, and I'm not sure if it was the best booking decision to turn Jaws face at the end of the Moonraker film. I think he's much more better suited as just a ruthless killer. Um, where in Moonraker he turns into a bit of a joke and sort of ruins the Jaws character a wee bit. But it's not a great Bond film. It's this it is the worst official James Bond film. And towards the end, the third act, the whole space stuff going on, you just want to switch it off. In 1981, we got the 12th James Bond film of the franchise. Now, Moonraker was directed once again by Lewis Gilbert, and this one is the first of 5 Bond films directed by John Glenn. His name escaped me there for a moment. Now, John Glenn was the main editor of numerous James Bond films before this one, so he was very aware of the Bond franchise. And For Your Eyes Only is a return to form. It's one of the more solid James Bond films. It's one of Roger Moore's best performances, I would say, and it's a much more serious, one of probably Moore's most serious entry in the Bond franchise. Very action packed, a lot of spy escapism going on in this film, For Your Eyes Only, and it has a very memorable opening where Blofeld, whom you think has gone for good at the end of Diamonds Are Forever, he well, they never say his name, but it's clearly him. He returns to try and get revenge on Roger Moore, James Bond rather, um, and it's a good helicopter chase scene. And there's also a nod to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Spoiler alert: Bond's wife dies in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and in this one, you see Roger Moore's Bond visiting her grave site, and then that's when you see Blofeld and the cat return. Um, and there's people out there kind of see each Bond being a different Bond, but sometimes in the series, there's nods like this is the same character. Because, if it weren't the same character, why would Bond be visiting um, Tracy's grave in For Your Eyes Only? It's, um, the day of her death on the gravestone's 1969, which was when it took place in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So I think Bond is the same character up until at least License to Kill. Um, you can't really believe it's the same person in the Pierce Brosnan era, but I mean, in Die Another Day, there's heaps of nods to the past, and there's even you know Q hands over a watch to Bond in Die Another Day, says this is your 20th one, I believe, which is a reference to it being the 20th official James Bond film. So you know if you suspend your disbelief, um, you could, say that's the same character. Um, and I can definitely buy into it being the same character from Doctor No to License to Kill. When it gets to the Pierce Brosnan era, it's like, I'm not buying it. It can't possibly be the same character now. But um, I guess anything can happen in film. Anyways, For Your Eyes Only, one of the more solid ones, and one of, I would say the second best Roger Moore James Bond film. Um, it's definitely worth a watch. Very action packed. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a wee break. I've been talking. Need another cup of tea, and I'll be right back. There's nobody. Well, there has been people coming in. There's been nobody in the chat just yet. But I'm going to get myself a cup of tea, and I'll be right back to talk about the rest of the 80s James Bond films. 1983 was quite the year for Bond, James Bond. I'm going to share this with my friend. See who wants to join in. Usually there's no plan for my live streams. I just come on here and interact with the chat, but today there is kind of a plan, talking about the James Bond franchise. So I'm going to grab myself a cup of tea and I'll be right back and continue to talk about the James Bond films, which I've rewatched this year. Dun, 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 do, 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 do. I'm back. Right. There's been absolutely nobody in the chat, but hopefully, if people were to watch me play this and they are Bond fans, they'll get some sort of enjoyment out of this video. It's a bit different from my usual live streams. So we're on to 983 now, and it was quite the year to be a Bond fan, as not one but two Bond films, and both were serious Bond films, although one of them really verges on being a self-parody of itself. But there was Never Say Never Again, released in 1983, starring Sean Connery, who returned to the role after 12 years. The last time he was in a Bond film was Diamonds Are Forever, and we're still in the middle of the Roger Moore era officially, but Sean Connery returned to the role in Never Say Never Again, which was a remake, an updated version of Thunderball. Um, Now, I don't rank, as I previously stated, Thunderball as one of the better James Bond films. It's a decent entry. It's an above average Bond film, but Never Say Never Again is in one of the worst category of Bond films. I always go into Never Say Never Again thinking I'm going to really enjoy it more. I'm going to enjoy this one, and I always end up thinking that's a really hard sit through. I think it doesn't help that Sean Connery's the only familiar actor. You're so used to the other, supporting cast of M, Q, Miss Moneypenny, and so on and so forth. By now, it's kind of when you see them recast in this film for this unofficial entry from Warner Brothers, it's a bit off-putting. It doesn't, there's no gun battle at the start, and the theme song it gets a lot of people don't like. I don't mind it. I think it's okay. It's quite catchy, but it's kind of off-putting. And I think there was a lot of trouble going on behind the scenes too. So obviously, that showed in the film. And I mean, highly, if you have never seen Never Say Never Again, you're not really missing much. And like I say, it's an update of Thunderbolts. It's a remake, but it's also in ways a lot different. And this is the one that's just like you could say it's a parody. You could say this one's a parody. There's some scenes that they go over the top for some of the jokes, some of the scenes, and it does feel like a self parody at times. It really does. I don't know if that's intentional or not. I mean, the fight scene during the early portion of the film is very self parody, very, going a bit too far with jokes here kind of thing. And it's great. As I say, Sean Connery, it's hard to argue him not being the definitive James Bond. It's great to see him return, and it's an interesting take on the character. Him being a now aging Bond, even though he was younger than Roger Moore, whom back in the 80s, 70s looked younger than Sean Connery. So it's an interesting take, but it is a hard sit through. It's, as I say, I could only rate it 4 out of 10 personally. Now, Octopussy, I've always had a soft spot for, and it's I would say it's the third best Roger Moore James Bond film, and just slightly below For Your Eyes Only, but it does contain one of the greatest action set pieces involving a train, and Roger Moore once again is pretty solid in this film. His performance was probably better in For Your Eyes Only and The Spy Who Loved Me, but again in this one he doesn't just phone it in. This is his sixth appearance as James Bond. Sean Connery had made his seventh appearance, sixth. He made six official appearances. Sean Connery, and one unofficial James Bond film, which was Never Say Never Again, which we just talked about. This is Roger Moore's sixth, and they came out the same year, just months apart. I've always had a soft spot for Octopussy. Now, it's definitely two levels above Never Say Never Again, and in the box office, it beat Never Say Never Again. And I think, in general, people rate Octopussy more than much more than Never Say Never Again. So in this round, between Conway and Roger Moore going 1-1, Moore comes out on top. His film is better, but as I say, it's hard to argue Sean Connery, but I love Roger Moore's portrayal as James Bond, and I love his more than Sean Connery's. But Sean Connery is often my number two. So I would have loved to have been alive in '93 just to had seen Sean Connery as Bond in Never Say Never Again, and Roger Moore as Bond in Octopussy. Octopussy is once again directed by John Glenn, who directed For Your Eyes Only. And if it didn't have so many silly scenes, I would have rated this above or just as good as For Your Eyes Only. But there's a bit too many silly scenes in it. But it does contain some of the best action sequences in the Bond franchise. And I've always had a soft spot for Octopussy. I think it's solid. Now, so Sean Connery had made 7 James Bond films altogether, including an official one. And by that point, Roger Moore was on his 6th one. And for A View to a Kill 985, I feel like Roger Moore appeared in that film to say he's made more Bond films than Connery. Not just say that, but the one who can say he's been in the most official Bond films. Because I feel like A View to a Kill, he is way past his prime as Bond by then. I think ideally he should have called it a day in Octopussy. That would have been a much better send off than A View to a Kill. Now, A View to a Kill, I gave a 5 out of 10. It features Christopher Walken and Grace Jones. I think Christopher Walken is outstanding. He elevates the film. He's just, I've never seen a bad performance of Christopher Walken yet. Loved him in this film, loved him in Batman Returns, and so on. I feel like A View to a Kill is like, in ways, sometimes it's so bad it's good. It's fairly enjoyable, but it's definitely one of the. It's not as bad as Moonraker, but it's definitely one of the weaker Bond entries. And it's quite far back in my Bond rankings. I enjoyed it for the most part, rewatching this one, but like I say, I think Roger Moore, whom I love, is my favorite Bond, but I think he's way past his prime as Bond in this particular film. And perhaps this should have been the debut of Timothy Dalton or Pierce Brosnan. I think it would have been a better end to the Roger Moore era on Octopussy. I think it's a better Bond film than A View to a Kill. But like I say, I did give it a 5 out of 10. So I don't hate it by any means, but it's definitely has its problems. And I do believe, I'm a big fan of Roger Moore, I do believe should have probably been someone else in this film, like Timothy Dolan or Pierce Brosnan. Now we're on to 1987, the year legends were born, of course. 31 years ago now. I'm really not looking forward to turning 31 in November, but life doesn't have a pause button, it seems. Anyways, Timothy Dolan debuted in 1987's The Living Daylights, which is directed by John Glenn, who directed the last three Roger Moore entries. You know what? I was a bit disappointed by this film. It's a decent entry, but on rewatch, I wasn't blown away by this movie. Um, I Timothy Dolan, he has his moments, but I wasn't too convinced by his. I didn't really enjoy some of his performance in this film or some of the direction of his character in this film. I enjoy him much more in License to Kill, which also has its problems. But Living Daylights from 1987 is not the best start for Dalton, and it's I give it a 6 out of 10. But for me, I'm not in that hurry to rewatch this one. But License to Kill, which was released 2 years later in 1989, I would say I enjoy more. Even though I give it the same rating, I enjoy License to Kill more. I'd have given License to Kill a higher rating, but I enjoy Timothy Dalton's performance much more in this Bond film, License to Kill. It's also great to see Desmond Lemon, Q, get more to do in this film. And Desmond, he played Q in most of Connery's Bond films, including From Russia of Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice. He was in On Her Majesty's Secret Service with George Lazenby. He was in Roger Moore's Bond films, The Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, and Octopussy and A View to a Kill. And he's in The Dalton Double. He wasn't when released Doctor No, he wasn't cast as Q by then. It wasn't until From Russia of Love he made his debut, and for some reason he's absent in Live and Let Die. I don't know what the specific reason was, but Desmond's absent from that film. But it's pretty cool because you'd later see him in the Pierce Brosnan era of the Bond films, which in a way feel like a different character from Dalton's Bond and so on. But it's pretty cool that Desmond appeared in, up until his death in 1999 with the first 5 Bond actors. So that's pretty cool that he was there. And he's one of the reasons people enjoy the Bond franchise is the Q gadget scenes, and he definitely adds a lot to the Bond franchise. It's just good to see him getting a bit more to do in License to Kill. And I do much prefer Dolan's performance. This film seems more suited for Dolan, License to Kill. The tone of the film seems much more suited for his Bond. A lot of people compare him to Daniel Craig now. I can totally see that. And I would have liked to seen Timothy Dolan get a third go around of the Bond films. He perhaps should have been in A View to a Kill. But the Bond franchise were on the shelf from 1989 to 1995 for numerous issues, rights issues, and I think there was a lawsuit going on as well. So there was no James Bond films in the early part of the 1990s, and the first one came out in 1995, first Bond film in the 90s. The first to feature Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. My Bond growing up, if you will. Of course, GoldenEye, the movie, is totally out, overshadowed by the game GoldenEye, which is one of the best the, the best Bond game ever and one of the best games ever in general. It's an absolute classic. And I think it actually made more money than the film, which, says it all about the film. You know, at the moment in my rewatched rankings, GoldenEye is my third favorite James Bond film. And I had a great time rewatching this one. Even though I've watched it a lot, I still had a great time rewatching it. I love Alec Trevelyan in this film, Sean Bean. I love Vic Zania on a top. I like Ormov. It's a lot of solid Bond baddies in this one, and it's a lot of very memorable action sequences. It does get a bit silly with the tanker, but it's pretty cool too in some of the scenes. Um, I like how it stops a train, and it's just a fantastic fight scene between Alec Trevelyan and James Bond 006 versus 007 at the end, and I definitely recommend this one. It's Judi Dench's debut as M, um, and she's like the only connection between the Pierce Brosnan Bond films and the Daniel Craig films. Even though Daniel Craig, Casino Royale reboots the Bond franchise, totally reboots it, but it does have the same M, Judi Dench's M, so it's a wee connection there going on. It's also directed by Martin Campbell. His first of two James Bond films. He would go on 11 years later to direct Daniel Craig's first James Bond film, Casino Royale, which is, actually a much different Bond film from GoldenEye. But GoldenEye, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. Also, marks the debut of Robbie Coltrane as Valentine. I always enjoyed him in the Bond films, and I was hoping that he would be back for more. Tomorrow Never Dies is one of those. It's like The Man with the Golden Gun. I never really look forward to rewatching it because I know there's not much going on. It's very formula Bond. Yes, there's a lot of good action sequences, but it's. I feel like the direction of Pierce Brosnan's Bond in this film is very weak at times, especially towards the end. In this battle with the henchman, who's not a very memorable henchman at all. His name escapes me. Stamper. I like Elliot Carver. I think he's a good main lead villain, but it's not the greatest James Bond story ever. It's very solid opening. It's one of the best opening three title scenes at the start. But it's definitely a fall from greatness that was GoldenEye. I only give it 4 out of 10, and it's below The Man with the Golden Gun in my rankings. I just feel like The Man with the Golden Gun has more to offer than Tomorrow Never Dies. Seriously, you're not really missing much from Tomorrow Never Dies. And Wei Lin, there's absolutely no chemistry between Wei Lin and Pierce Brosnan at all, which I think hinders the film. So Pierce Brosnan's era is definitely a mixed bag. It's got its one great film, it's got its above average film, and fairly decent entry, The World Isn't Enough, and then it's got Tomorrow Never Dies and Die Another Day. Almost approaching the hour mark. I'm going to try and wrap this video up on the hour mark. Now we're talking about the first 40 years of Bond on cinema. Since I've rewatched my whole VHS collection, which you can see behind me right here, finally got to finally got to rewatching Die Another Day. Now, The World Is Not Enough was my first Bond experience in the cinema. I became a Bond fan in 1999. And but if I'm being honest, I remember coming out to cinema. I was disappointed by The World Is Not Enough. I think it didn't help. I just watched the previous 18 official Bond entries, and compared to them, The World Is Not Enough wasn't that great compared to a lot of the entries. But I had a good time rewatching it this time around, and I think it's a couple of levels up above Tomorrow Never Dies, and it has more of a story to it, compared to a number of the Bond films. In fact, I'd only say maybe Her Majesty's Secret Service has more story to it than The World Is Not Enough, and I believe this is Pierce Brosnan's best performance in a Bond. Now, some of the direction of Pierce Brosnan's Bond is a bit off the rails, but Pierce Brosnan himself, the material he was given, he is solid in all the Bond entries, including Die Another Day, which I'll get on to in a minute. But The World Is Not Enough. Um, I enjoyed rewatching this one more than I thought I was going to, and I give it a solid 6 out of 10. Um, GoldenEye still by far the best out of the Brosnan era and one of the best James Bond films ever, an even greater game. But I I enjoyed The World Is Not Enough on this rewatch much more than I did 19 years ago coming out to cinema. I seem to appreciate it more than these days. Die Another Day, yes, I finally got round. I've mentioned it quite often in my videos lately. I've still to watch Die Another Day. I was putting it off and off and off. Pierce Brosnan's swan song as James Bond also stars Halle Berry. Needs a dust, this VHS. Um, According to the News of the World, which doesn't exist anymore, it's super cool quality from start to finish. And The Sun, which was basically the same as the News of the World. Bond is back and it's even better than ever. That's not true. That's definitely not true. I haven't actually rated this film yet in my notes, but I'm going to give Die Another Day. I remember being very excited to see this film in the cinema, reading all about it. I was when I was at my Bond fandom, if you will, was at its peak in 2002, and it's basically like a video game came to life, came to film. That's what it feels like, this film, and it's probably the one of the more ballsy films, if you will. Um, the whole Bond getting captured at the start, and the torture scenes, and the titles, and it's definitely, you know, the makers of this movie were definitely going for it, but it doesn't, like, it's like a slow start, and then it speeds up a bit too much. In the latter middle and towards the end. And once it's done, you were like, is that it? As a celebration of the Bond franchise and the 40th anniversary and it being the 20th James Bond film, it's a nice celebration, but uh, the film technically is one of the weaker ones. Die Another Day. Let's look at my notes. Actually, let's look before officially rating this movie. Now, I have rated all the Bond films before, so it'll be interesting to see how much my opinions have changed over the years. This is the longest Bond themed video ever. First ever Bond themed live video from me. Let's see what I've wrote. So I'd say it's better than Never Say Never Again. And after Never Say Never Again, I've put Tomorrow Never Dies in 18th place. And the list includes the unofficial Bond films too. Above that's The Man with the Golden Gun. It's not as good as The Man with the Golden Gun, Die Another Day. I think Tomorrow Never Dies is better. So I'm gonna place Die. It's not the worst James Bond film ever, but it's close. It's more watchable than Never Say Never Again. and it's better than Moonraker. So it's not the worst official Bond film, but it's the second worst one. I would rate Tomorrow Never Dies, which I didn't really rate that well, higher than Die Another Day. So I officially give Die Another Day a four out of 10. Um, Far too much CGI involved in this film. Some points off for that. The first time they used a CGI Bond, it just looks horrendous. But even though I've rated it pretty low, and it's one of the weaker Bond films, it is still enjoyable. It's like a hot mess kind of a film. I still had a good time watching it, even though technically it's one of the weaker ones. But I thought, despite it being a bad film, Pierce Brosnan's still solid in the role, and I would have loved to have seen Pierce Brosnan get a fifth James Bond film, and even a sixth. Um, rewatching these films, I enjoy his performance. Now, sometimes the direction of his character is a bit off, like I mentioned in Tomorrow Never Dies, um, but he is a solid Bond throughout the four films. So there you have it. It's my opinion and the original 20 James Bond films, all my VHS collection, Casino Royale, which I haven't rewatched yet. I haven't rewatched any of the Daniel Craig ones yet. I will. I'll probably end up talking about them in a separate video, and I'll probably add them to the rankings. But so I give Never Say Never Again a 4 out of 10. Casino Royale, the spoof, 2 out of 10 as far as the official ones go. So Never Say Never Again. Congratulations, you're the best unofficial Bond film. But as for the official Bond rankings, after rewatching them again this year, excluding the Daniel Craig era Bond films, of course, because I'm going to be depending on timing and things. I've got Halloween coming out on October 19th, and I want to watch all the Halloween films before then. So I don't think I'm going to have time to rewatch the Daniel Craig era Bond films. Uh, so I'm going to probably put my Bond rewatched marathon on the shelf again until Halloween's over, and then I'll rewatch them maybe in November and give my opinion on the Daniel Craig era. And the Daniel Craig era I haven't rewatched as much as the the original 20 films, because Die Another Day 2002, that was my peak of my fandom, and when Daniel Craig debuted as Bond, by then I wasn't really into the film so much. I did go and see every single one of his Bond films in the cinema once, um, but I kind of I've always still love James Bond, still like it, but I guess my fandom for Bonds died down a wee bit, as you grow older and stuff, and start going out drinking and all that fun stuff. But anyways, let's. I'll reveal my entire rankings. So I was only going to do the top 10, but I'll go through them all, and from worst to best. My shelf doesn't have enough room for Die Another Day, but I'm going to take Moonraker out and place it here. Die Another Day in its place. Me, Moonraker. So, Moonraker, Roger Moore's fourth Bond entry and directed by Lewis Gilbert, his final James Bond film, is the worst one out of the official bunch I've rewatched. 3 out of 10. Tomorrow Never Dies, Pierce Brosnan's second James Bond film from 1997. I'd give a 4 out of 10. Die Another Day, which I just talked about from 2002, another 4 out of 10. Man with the Golden Gun, 4 out of 10. View to a Kill, Diamonds Are Forever, I gave 5 out of 10. The Living Daylights, which disappointed me on this rewatch, 6 out of 10. Also again 6 out of 10. These are the above average, pretty solid, decent entry type of Bond films, and that are You Only Live Twice, Thunderball, Live and Let Die, which I believe had potential to be much better, but it just doesn't get there for me. Then The World Is Not Enough, License to Kill, Octopussy. Now the ones with 7 out of 10 were For Your Eyes Only, Doctor No, Goldfinger, which I used to rate higher, but the more I rewatch Goldfinger, the less I like it. Still very classic with a lot of memorable moments. But my top four Bond films go as follow. In fourth place is the one and only to feature George Lazenby on Her Majesty's Secret Service from 1969, directed by Peter Hunt. In third place is Goldeneye, the first to star Pierce Brosnan from 1995, directed by Martin Campbell. And in second place, which is usually my favorite Bond film of all time, which features my favorite Bond, Roger Moore, is The Spy Who Loved Me. I gave an 8 out of 10. Also gave Goldeneye an 8 out of 10. But the definitive Bond film, I feel, after rewatching them this year, is From Russia of Love from 1963, 55 years ago. To me, that film, as far as Bond is concerned, overall has not been topped. Starring second to star Sean Connery in what I believe to be his very best performance as James Bond. One day I'll probably end up rewatching the Daniel Craig era. I'll probably talk about them in a live video, probably like I did here, and I'll add them to the rankings. I haven't rewatched them as much as the others, as I mentioned before, but I always seem to favor, when I look back on them and think about the Daniel Craig Bond films, I always seem to favor um, Casino Royale and Skyfall more than the other two. As far as Quantum of Solace and Spectre go, I was feel they were disappointing. And I remember I rewatched Spectre just last year with one of my cousins, and we thought it was quite dreadful, actually. Now, Bond will be back in 2020, February 14th, I believe, is the release date for the Bond 25, the 25th official James Bond film. The fifth to star Daniel Craig. Um, I'm not sure what. I'm kind of nervous that political correctness is going to ruin the Bond franchise, and I wouldn't be surprised if it did. Um, over the years, there's been a few PC things crept into the Bond franchise when you look back at them. But I do believe political correctness will be James Bond's downfall. But I'm trying to keep optimistic about Bond's future on film. And I do enjoy Daniel Craig. And years ago, they did rate all the Bond actors. Um, I'd say Daniel Craig. See, Pierce. See, all of them, with the exception of George Lazenby, are all very solid. And now, but my top two usually are Sean Connery and Roger Moore. Roger Moore's usually always has been my number one for years, and Sean Connery is usually number two. But I enjoy Pierce Brosnan as Bond. I enjoy Timothy Dalton and The License to Kill specifically. I really enjoy Timothy Dalton in that film. And Daniel Craig I've enjoyed, even though I think two of his four films have been disappointing and a bit garbage. I have enjoyed him as Bond. Um, so we'll see what his fifth outing is like. It'll be the first James Bond film of this up and coming decade. So we'll see. I hope it gets off to a good start. Anyways, I'm going to wrap up things here. There's been quite a number of people popped in and have popped out, but that's cool. This wasn't really like my usual live streams where I just have a general chat with people, I thought I would discuss the James Bond franchise, and I went over an hour discussing um, almost the entire series, apart from Daniel Craig era, which I haven't rewatched yet. I will, and no doubt I'll have a video about it, and I'll add Daniel Craig's films to my rewatched rankings. But anyway, I'm going to go here. Um, for anybody that stumbles across this stream, I hope you enjoy. I'm going to watch it back myself, see how bad I was. But a little bit different from the usual live streams. And I hope you enjoyed. And like James Bond always returns, Bane, Paul Michael David Bane, will be back on YouTube with the 1186th upload, whether that's a live video or a non-live video on my main channel. Or maybe there'll be a video on Team Paul Michael that will finally become that wrestling channel. We shall see. Right, I'm off now.